Thank you so much, Brandon. I love the phrase that that someone used at the last session. It says that, I don't want, there's always this danger of boring all of you into a coma. And I thought that at the end of 2 days of such electrifying discussions, if I even attempt to summarize, then I will bore all of you into a coma. And that's not where we want to see you at the end of 2 days. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to be able to speak at the closing session of the International Conference on Accounts of the Conflict organized by INCOR. I have been personally associated with INCOR for a number of years now, first in my capacity as part of a research steering group of an extremely interesting project that had looked at psychosocial perspectives on peace building, and more generally now as member of the current International Advisory Group. The reason I mention this is because it has provided me with an opportunity to engage with INCOR's work, both in terms of the range, both in terms of their online work, as well as and otherwise. And I've never failed to actually be impressed both by the range of things they do and the depth that they bring to their work on peace and conflict. I think the depth of their work was abundantly in evidence over the last 2 days, and I think you will all agree with me, as we got a sense of this magnificent digital archive and began to comprehend both the magnitude of that work and the creative impulses and the complex processes that have gone into its making. As Brandon and Gillian explained yesterday, the accounts of the conflict builds on the Kane legacy, which, as we were told, is the largest repository of digital information on the conflict in Northern Ireland. The Accounts of the Conflict project consists of personal accounts of individuals who have been affected by the conflict in Northern Ireland in various ways, and has clearly involved a monumental effort of first collecting and then digitally archiving these stories for peace building. And this brings me to the key words in the title of this conference: storytelling, digital archiving, and peace building. And one has to use a digital vocabulary. So how do we actually toggle our way through this? And the term storytelling, as Grania Kelly explained, is used here interchangeably with other terms that describe this type of work, namely oral history. Sometimes we call it narrative work or testimony work. We heard in the session this afternoon that some people would prefer to use the term testimony work rather than storytelling, because it would appear that the term storytelling depoliticizes everything. Where the whole point is that it's important to define what we do, and I think that definition came through, and I'm actually quoting from the paper on the first day, which described this whole storytelling effort as a process which allows for reflection, expression, listening, and possible collection of personal, communal, and institutional stories, related obviously in this case to the conflict in and about Northern Ireland. Now, the key to linking this storytelling and story listening function to peace building lies in the diversity of experiences of the Northern Ireland conflict that is sought to be captured in this digital archive. To me, here lies the crux of the matter. It is only when diverse and sometimes conflicting narratives are given due space that there is a gradual realization that one truth does not cancel out another, that one reality does not negate another, that his story does not have to overshadow her story. There's space for both and for multiple narratives, and it is only when these stories of conflict sometimes coalesce, sometimes collide, that new dialogic spaces emerge and new meanings are co-created. And this is really what the Storytelling Project has been all about. Yesterday, a lot of conversations referred to co-creation and co-ownership of the stories, and how empowering that could potentially be. Perhaps we have to allow for the dialectics of competing stories to yield space to a dialogue, and allow that to emerge as an organic process. To my mind, one of the key strengths of the Accounts of Conflict project is that it is premised on the idea that through remembering and retelling, different groups can form new bonds and new solidarities. Norman Duncan reminded us this morning that there is a counter-argument to the one that says there is no point in what he called rehashing the past. And that counter-argument is that it is important to acknowledge the past in order to better manage the present and to enable what he called transformative reconnection. I think that has a powerful resonance in Northern Ireland as well, and certainly in Jammu and Kashmir, which is where I work. Or to put it in another way, following Damien Gorman, who was cited yesterday, some stories are hard to listen to, some are hard to tell. But it is only when we gather this across the range that we weave a better future story. And I think the use of this word weave triggered another thought. And I must flag that the powerful visuals of the exhibition on the textiles of the conflict was truly a beautiful and sobering experience. When we look closely at these weaves that tell us of loss and grief, of occupation and resistance, of hope and despair, and victims and survivors. They all coexist through the weaves. And I think it was a great idea to showcase this because it gave added power to the central trope that structure narrative work. The idea that memory utilizing stories from communities can indeed provide a space for healing. The other key term of the conference is, of course, digital. And there is no escaping that. And yesterday we heard from Doug Boyd about the challenges of creating what he called a different form of historical record. It's a different form because the nature of the digital archives is such that it places this in a qualitatively different category. He also talked about the importance of an oral history metadata synchronizer and the challenge of involving communities for indexing work rather than invest in time-consuming, expensive processes of creating transcripts, which, as he also pointed out, may also be flawed. But the matter, of course, does not end with just creating digital archives, and this was clear in the 2 days of deliberation. There is also the next question of digital access strategy, which then becomes not just a technical question, but a larger philosophical one. And this takes us right to one of the central themes of the conference, the ethical considerations in collecting stories, then in archiving them, and finally disseminating these stories, particularly the personal accounts. This is particularly salient when it comes to personal accounts of the conflict of the digital age, because we are also documenting real-time conflict stories. The storytellers are still often alive, they are living in their communities, and how their story will be used can raise some very, very thorny ethical issues. Brandon pointed to the uniqueness of the conflict context, and that challenges us to think how we can collect and archive these stories, and how this context is set by the recent past, but also by historical memories in the continuum of time, as Vesna also pointed out. Yesterday's parallel discussions in one of the groups that I was in saw us look at some of the inclusions and exclusions from official histories and national archives. And our discussion centered around the gendered silences and often the absence or near absence of women's voices in accounts of the conflict, not just in Northern Ireland, but in other conflict theaters across the world, such as Palestine and Kashmir. If women's stories find a space, they are often not scripted by her, but they are sometimes told through a very, very patriarchal constructs. In other words, the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes we may hear about her, but often not from her. Peter Haywood shared his personal story, speaking for those injured in the Troubles, and in that context he made a larger point when he talked about the importance of educating the future generations on the impact of violence on families and communities so that it does not happen again. We also discussed how political leaders, community members, and family can sometimes control the narratives, and how that can also result in certain forms of exclusion, be it the exclusion of the voices of the working classes or women. This is also part of the challenges of making films on the conflict. And though I have to say that the films that we saw yesterday seem to have negotiated this terrain very, very skillfully. There has been some disquiet in some quarters about whether the storytellers are speaking the truth. I know that from where I come from, there's an obsession about this. Are they speaking the truth? Vesna reminded us that narrative truth is different from forensic truth. We are not looking for forensic truth from these stories. And what is important is that stories should be available, and people must be able to sift through this and make sense of it. Trust people was Katrina's message this afternoon. There are furious debates going on about the biases about interviewers as well. But less attention is paid on the biases of historians who write official histories. And as someone who comes from India, I know that writing history is a very, very political act. At the end of the day, all history writing is a political act. And as Adrian indicated this afternoon, the political climate and social context determines what people are saying about not only what people are saying, but also how archiving is being done, and what he called the appetite for public release at a particular point in time. The Canadian archivist Terry Cook, whose work I was reading a month ago, noted that it is the archivist who now decides very often what is to be visible, who is to be visible, what is to be remembered, and who has a voice. Archivists were, of course, traditionally supposed to be in the preservation business. They were not supposed to be in the memory business at all. They were supposed to act as a bridge between the creators and the users of records. They were supposed to be what is, quaintly called handmaidens of history. But no longer so. I think this is acknowledged universally now. They are now seen as active agents in creating social memory. And I think this came through in our deliberations quite powerfully. I think it required the wisdom of South Africa and the depth of its post-apartheid reflexivity to articulate in no uncertain terms the idea that the notion of archival ethics cannot be divorced from justice. As far as I recall, it was the Johannesburg Colloquium of 2005, if I'm not mistaken, that actually put forward the notion that we have to go beyond looking at archives through the normative assumptions circumscribed by power and status quo. And I understand this was also discussed at one of the parallel sessions yesterday. This is a radical re-articulation. And Vern Harris, who is with us, has in his writings pointed out that if archivists construct codes of conduct that define their core principles as a defense against the dynamics of power and authority, they become useless. Instead, Harris suggests that they should deal with praxis and directly ask, what should our politics be? And again, as someone coming from South Asia and from India, I'm forced to think about structural conflict all the time. I'm forced to think about a peacetime war that is happening even when the guns are silenced. And I think this articulation of constantly asking myself, what is my politics, has a very, very powerful resonance for me. And it may go a little bit against the North Atlantic positivist tradition, but so be it. At the parallel session on navigating the legal and ethical parameters of archiving, Michelle Maloney had pointed to the relationship between power and ethics, and this is so crucial, so critical. And she suggested that levels of empowerment are opened up if interviewees are included, as it creates a sense of co-ownership. There was much discussion on the Boston College case, and the questions were raised as to whether institutions can be trusted to protect deposits and whether institutions have the power to refuse to release data. It was suggested that a co-ownership of data is essential. Before I wind up, may I just take the opportunity to thank Brandon, Gillian, and the whole INCO team for organizing 2 days of such electrifying discussions. And thank you especially for inviting me to be a part of it. I'm a social scientist by training. I'm not an archivist. I'm not an oral historian. I'm not a psychologist. So this has been a tremendous learning event for me personally. Since my primary research has been on Jammu and Kashmir, I would like to end my reflections with one of my favorite poets who was born in Delhi, grew up in Kashmir, and passed on in the United States. I refer to Agha Shahid Ali. And I'm going to end with what he says because it captures so much of what we actually discussed over the last 2 days on narratives, trauma, memory, and what conflict can do to relations between communities. Of course, it's contextualized, it's set in Jammu and Kashmir, but it also transcends Jammu and Kashmir. At a certain point, I lost track of you. They make a desolation and call it peace. When you left, even the stones were buried. The defenseless would have no weapons. My memory is again in the way of your history. Army convoys like desert caravans, in the smoking oil of dimmed headlights, time dissolved all. Winter, its crushed fennel. We cannot ask them, are you done with the world? In the lake, the arms of temples and mosques are locked in each other's reflections. Have you soaked saffron to pour on them when they are found like this centuries later in this country that I have stitched to your shadow? At a certain point, I lost track of you. You needed me. You needed to perfect me. In your absence, you polished me into the enemy. Your history gets in the way of my memory. I am everything you lost, your perfect enemy. Your memory gets in the way of my memory. I am everything you lost. You can't forgive me. My memory keeps getting in the way of your history. There is nothing to forgive. You can't forgive me. I hid my pain even from myself. I revealed my pain only to myself. There is everything to forgive. You can't forgive me. Thank you.